Hello again, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of The Opening Bell with Alex and Matt, bringing you the latest boxing news and some big headlines this weekend early on. And the show will reflect on some of the action from the weekend, including Wood, Warrington, and of course, Ryan Garcia back in a boxing ring. And this weekend, there's a couple of shows on DAZN on either side of the Atlantic. We'll delve into the heavyweights this week in history, when we remember Oliver McCall, the fight after he lost to Frank Bruno. That's coming up from 1996. Matt Christie, how are you?
I'm good, mate. Yeah, I'm good. Don't know if anybody's got a teenage daughter out there, but mine is 13 in a few weeks, actually, and she is 13 going on 17 all of a sudden, and the change in her in the space, I would say, of about 8 months. That's all it's been. 8 months is mind-blowing. So if anybody does have a teenage daughter, you have my sympathy. It's a stressful business, but there is still those magical moments now and again. So yeah, I'm really, really good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Buckle up. That's a roller coaster. Oh, buckle up, my friend. I'm good. I had another boozy weekend. Crikey, the Steeds had a run of it. I went to the rugby in Cardiff on the weekend, so very frustrating 60 minutes or so. Just one of those days where everything was going against Scotland, and Wales were terrific, and the atmosphere was great. The roof was closed. But in the end, the mighty Scots, the Jockeyes, you couldn't keep us down, and class came through. Yeah, it was great. Took Hannah. One of those lovely birthday stroke Christmas presents where I take her to see my team, and then we catch up with loads of my uni mates from the weekend, one by one. Yeah, here's your present that just so happens to be really good for me. One of those. But it was a great weekend. Yeah, great weekend. Since then, I mean, as a journalist, the boxing stories have been gifts from the gods, I think, over the last week. Gifts from the gods. As a fan, you sit back and go, wow, a few smiles, a few smirks, a few internal finger points, I suspect, and shakes of the head. But yeah, gift from the gods. I think the news line's for you, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the figures for boxing scene last night, actually, and yeah, there's been one or two talking points that people have been very keen to read about, it appears. But it has been, you're trying to get the most out of one subject, dive into one subject, get different viewpoints on it, get a real understanding of it, and something else is coming along. But I do think that obviously what we're going to get to is Conor Benn. That was truly stunning news that he left Matchroom to join Zuffa, Dana White's Zuffa, Eddie Hearn's new arch enemy. It was really surprising. It genuinely didn't know it was coming, had no idea. So that was stunning. And then, of course, there's certain people in the know saying, well, if you think that was big, wait till what's coming. And then, of course, yesterday, Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao II is announced. But for me, I still think the Conor Benn leaving Matchroom news was a far bigger jaw drop.
Which is the bigger story? Which sort of resonates, do you think, more with both boxing and sports fans?
I mean, my barometer would be the analytics on the boxing scene website. The Mayweather-Pacquiao news is still new. So I'll wait and see. Ask me next week and I'll tell you what did the most views, whether it's stuff about Conor Benn or whether it's stuff about Mayweather and Pacquiao. Mayweather and Pacquiao, of course, are kind of both world famous. They both transcended the sport. They're both genuine bona fide household names. I do think that within the sport, looking at what's on socials and everything else, is that the people that are following the sport would have been more invested in this Conor Benn news. I think given the landscape that we're in at the moment as well, and people are kind of just waiting for Zuffa to announce the next one, and now you're thinking who's going to be the next one. There's already rumours that it could be Alexander Usyk. But I think that this play to get Conor Benn is a statement. It's a real statement. And I think not only is it a statement because Conor Benn, for the time being at least, is marketable, it's a real statement given that after Matchroom have been telling us that they had kind of this superstar in the mist for so many years, stuck by him during some real contentious moments, some real difficult moments, that I think seriously muddied Matchroom's reputation. It's almost like it was Zuffa saying, if we're going to get anyone, we're going to get him. Not necessarily because they believe he's the most marketable star in the sport, but because they believe that would annoy Matchroom the most. Shithousery at its finest.
Which is exactly the line I used on Twitter, actually. Absolutely the line that I used on Twitter. The lines that came from Conor Benn, he described it as an opportunity I simply couldn't refuse. I'd love Eddie to continue to be part of my team and for our partnership to evolve in this new chapter, he suggests, although some of the reactions from both Eddie Hearn and his father, Barry, in the short term suggest that might be difficult to do. What are the details on this as much as we know, Matt? Are we looking at 7 to 10 figure numbers and a one fight deal as some of the reports? What do we know?
8 figures. 8 figures, one fight deal is essentially what we know. There would have been an option for Matchroom to extend their contract with Conor Benn. His last fight within the match within his previous contract with Matchroom was the rematch with Chris Eubank Jr. Eddie Hearn has come out and said, look, I made a mistake here. I took my eyes off the ball. I genuinely didn't think I'd need to kind of push Conor Benn on a new contract. I was kind of wait to see what the next move would be for Conor Benn. He obviously had those 2 fights with Eubank last year. Didn't think there was any need to get him in a meeting room and get him to sign on the dotted line, which from Eddie Hearn's point of view, and from the whole of Matchroom's point of view, from Barry Hearn's point of view, from Frank Smith's point of view, you can completely understand that. So, people are kind of saying, well, it's only one fight deal. Maybe you'll go back to Matchroom afterwards. But one fight could inevitably lead to more fights for Conor Benn and what he does next. One would think with the figures that are being thrown around is that he's not going to be given a particularly easy fight. They will have to come up with something marketable to make those numbers work, one would think. Few rumours that it could be Shakur Stevenson. Obviously, there's one eye on Ryan Garcia, but there's so much kind of going on behind the scenes that the dots are all over the place. As in, Conor Benn for a long time now has made it clear that he would like to fight for one of the established sanctioning body titles, primarily the WBC title. And I think the last bit of magic that Matchroom managed to work for Conor Benn was sitting down in front of the WBC at the convention in December, and somehow persuading them to put Conor Benn as number one welterweight, even though he hadn't fought in that weight division since 2022. So he sits there. He should be next for Ryan Garcia. But then you look at what Zuffa's what their battle plan is, and the battle plan isn't to provide sanctioning body titles for their fighters. It's to establish their own belt. So one wonders if the Zuffa belt will be what Conor Benn will be persuaded to fight for, if the long-term aim is not to recognise the sanctioning bodies. But I think it's clear that Conor Benn wants that WBC title. It's a title that his dad won, albeit in a different weight class. But yeah, we don't know. I think my first reaction was that everybody who listens to this podcast, who read Boxing News when I was the editor, and the last few years were largely not dominated, but an awful lot of my time was spent investigating the whole Conor Benn case with UCAD and with VADA. And I felt it was diabolical. I thought it was one of the worst black eyes that the sport has had in the modern era. So my feelings for Conor Benn have been tainted somewhat by that. So when I saw that he'd left, my first reaction was, wow, if ever anybody needed any more evidence to highlight what kind of person he is, well, you've got it. you've got it now. But then I listened to a Conor Benn interview that he conducted either Friday or Saturday. I think it was with Boxing King Media. And he said that ultimately no one's going to know who I am in 5-10 years. I'm going to be retired. I've got to do what's best for me. I've got to do what's best for my family. And this is, I think his words were, somebody would have to be mentally ill to turn down this offer that I've got. Now, I've never been offered the kind of money that Conor Benn has been offered, but in the not so distant past, I was offered a job for an awful lot of money, but I didn't feel it was the right thing to do at the time. I didn't feel it was the right thing to do, and I turned it down. In 10 years' time, I might regret that decision. And someone like Conor Benn taking the life-changing sum, he's probably doing the right thing because he's right. People won't know who he is he's not going to be relevant. And I thought it was almost refreshing that he was admitting that, because I thought Conor Benn had got so big-headed that he'd lost complete touch with reality. But the fact that he is saying, okay, there's a short shelf life here, I need to earn as much money as possible. I can understand it. I think you have a choice in your mind. You do the right thing. And it really differs from person to person what that right thing is to do. I do, however, kind of judging his decision by the way I conduct my own affairs, given how much Matchroom had sacrificed for him, I wouldn't have been able to look myself in the mirror if I'd have turned around at this point and said enough is enough, particularly after Conor Benn has just got to the stage now where Matchroom were hoping he always would. And he's got to that point where he might be at his most marketable. He may never be this marketable again. And he turns around and he says, no, I'm off. But each their own. We all have our own lives to lead. There's only us that need to look at our reflections in the mirror. And if he can do that, and if he's happy, then it's his decision, isn't it?
Ultimately, the kind of money that's on offer, life-changing or future guaranteeing, legacy money, I suppose, when you're thinking about your kids, their kids, that's the kind of sums that we're talking about here for a one-fight hit to an extent, having already had those two big paydays against Chris Eubank as well. So, yeah, you can understand it. Your decision was a kind of moral and philosophical one about the kind of person that you are, the beliefs you hold, and who and what it is that you want to be. Absolutely. And with that in mind, that's why Matchroom, that's why the Hearns are so disappointed, isn't it? I blame myself. I made a mistake. I misjudged the character, said Eddie Hearn. Barry Hearn a little spicier maybe with his language in an interview with Talk Sport just the other day. Boxers come and go, but this wasn't an average relationship with a contracted fighter. Conor was as close as you could get to being part of the family. For a decision like this to be made without even a phone call or even a suggestion from Eddie to meet and discuss it was unbelievable. Instead, we were told it was best to go through lawyers. In my 50-odd years of promoting, said Barry Hearn, this is the most horrible, outrageous thing I've seen. What I'm interested in, given what you hinted at from 2022 and all that's gone in between, Matt, is that without doubt, Eddie Hearn at the very least knows as much about what went on with Conor Benn's failed test and how that was dealt with. He knows that just about as well as anyone. And you and I know some of it. Enough. He knows almost all of it. In other words, he knows where the bodies are buried. He knows what went on. He knows the truth of that and how it was dealt with and why Conor Benn essentially got out of that situation. Hearn knows. Suspect the dad knows too. Now, when your emotions have been jarred, when relationships have been broken, you know how some people react in those situations. I don't think that'll necessarily unfold in a way which would be pleasing for those of us that love the truth, Matt, and would have liked that to have unfolded in a different way from 2022 onwards. But you never know when relationships are fractured and broken. So I'll be intrigued to see how that plays out, if indeed there's anything to play out at all.
And this was my first reaction. It's one of my first thought processes when I was trying to really digest this information is, wow, Eddie Hearn may now have one or two things to say about this situation. I would have thought, though, Eddie Hearn, and this was the other thing, wasn't it? So the news broke, was it Thursday night or Friday night? I can't remember what it was now. I'm not sure. But then the next day, Eddie Hearn was being interviewed and was speaking to people, and he did say, I've known about this for a few days now. Had you been putting the microphone under my mouth a few days ago, this might have been a very, very different interview. So I think if we had known then, and we had spoke to Eddie Hearn at the point where he was just finding out, that there might have been some choice words for Conor Benn there. I would say that given Eddie Hearn's position in the business, he knows how volatile the business is. He knows how flaky certain characters can be. He will also know how marketable Conor Benn is that he will be thinking, okay, at the moment, I don't want to work with a little rascal. But just imagine in a few fights' time and he's still winning fights. And then he says to me, actually, I want to come back to you, Eddie. So Eddie Hearn will have an opportunity to say to Zuffa, well, you tried it, but he wanted to be back with me. And I think there's all manner of things that will be going through Eddie Hearn's head as to why he won't completely spill the beans on that situation. I think it's, people have been dissuaded somewhat, particularly people in the media, from talking about those dark days in 2022 and the long and winding cases that followed. But Conor Benn failed 2 tests 5 weeks apart in 2022. And another thing I immediately did was then looked at what Zuffa's drug testing policies are. Now, I think that's quite interesting to look at as well. I won't spell them out on here, but I think it's interesting to look at that and what Zuffa are going to do. And this is a point I made. There was a column that was published, and it's brought actually the editor's letter I've taken over to Boxing Scene now. And it was a look at the landscape. It was before knowing this about Conor Benn, but one of the things in there is if Zuffa are going to come in and claim they're going to take over the sport, one of the things they need to manage really, really effectively and show that they can manage it in the way that the WBC didn't is the issue of performance-enhancing drugs. So how they manage that whole process is interesting. What I'm not saying, and what I just want to make completely clear, is I'm not saying Conor Benn is now going to be given license, or any fighter is going to be going and given license to take performance-enhancing drugs when they perform under the Zuffa umbrella. But it is a slightly different setup to what the WBC would demand, for example. But we'll watch and see how that plays out. But I think Conor Benn has got to be super, super careful while he's over there. I think at the moment, because he lost that fight to Chris Eubank Jr., then he won it. So in his mind, he is probably feeling about as invincible as he's ever felt. He did endure whatever happened in 2022 in regard to those drug tests. What he endured afterwards was some really dark and testing times. He had to come through that. And he has, and he is now one of the most marketable fighters in the country. Without question. Probably the most, out of all of the guys that are active, he's probably the most marketable fighter at the moment. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily in relation to how good he is. In my opinion, we still don't know how good he is. And this is why I'm saying he needs to be careful. With Matchroom, he had a protective arm around him, and they managed to matchmake his career super carefully on the way up. Super carefully. The reason that there was, or one of the reasons why that Chris Eubank Jr. fight was first put on the negotiating table in 2022 is Conor Benn had got himself into a position where he was world ranked at welterweight, by beating either former titleists or faded contenders. He was beating old names. It was a tried and tested formula to get a young fighter towards the top without allowing him to dip his toes in with live opposition. And we must remember the state of Chris Eubank Jr. in that rematch. He was a shell of himself. And he wasn't exactly at his best in the first fight, and he still beat Benn fairly comfortably. So one wonders now, without someone looking after their investment like Matchroom did, and Zuffa's policy is to make the best versus the best, to ensure that all of these fights are challenging. We don't know who's going to win before the opening bell. Is that if Conor Benn is suddenly thrown in with the people that he wants to fight, that markability could plummet very, very quickly.
I wanted to ask you a sort of related, because you're talking about sort of testing policies. Do we know how or what the British Boxing Board of Control's view is about the idea, or let's say the potential of Zuffa coming to the UK and theoretically Zuffa titles being on the line in a British boxing ring?
I spoke to Robert Smith yesterday, and he said that all that's happened so far is that Robert Smith has had a verbal conversation with the UK representative of Zuffa Boxing about the possibility of the British Boxing Board of Control recognising the Zuffa title in the future. There was no formal request made. They haven't got a date in mind. But I think it's easy to kind of start to think, well, hang on, if they're reaching out to the British Boxing Board of Control, one would think that they are thinking of staging a big event in this country that will have a Zuffa title on it. What Robert Smith did make clear is, at the moment, they deal with the four main sanctioning bodies, and they will also recognise the IBO. He said there's no plans to add any more to that roster. This is the suggestion is that 5 is quite enough. And he said, but if Zuffa come forward with a proposal and all of the evidence and information that the British Boxing Board of Control need, they will consider it. There was no suggestion that this will just be approved. No suggestion whatsoever. And also he said, regardless of whether there's a Zuffa title or not, we will still be the commissioner. We will still commission the event. So it's not going to be a case of Zuffa come in and then Zuffa are promoter, sanctioning body, commissioner. So, yeah, we wait and see. But I think really with that, Robert Smith would be open to considering the proposal of recognising the Zuffa title in this country.
Okay, so what if you're trying to get ahead of the game in that, and just us trying to think about that, Matt, what gets that over the line? What gets him to say yes to having yet another title to be fought for on British shores? Is it simply a case of the amount of money involved in the show, or would it be influenced by, say, if there was a high-profile British fighter involved in said show?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I did ask him. I said, "Is the criteria in order to get a title on the line?" But we know that the board have turned down certain lesser sanctioning bodies in the past. There's certain sanctioning bodies that are still kind of out there battling for some kind of relevance that they just wouldn't be entertained. But I think for me personally, I can't speak for Robert Smith on this. Obviously, I can't speak for Robert Smith on this. But this is different, I think, with Zuffa, is the strides they're making, the amount of money they've got behind them, that I suspect that if Zuffa wanted one of their titles to be showcased at a British event, they'd be able to tick the boxes that the board would need to be ticked.
So it seems logical, likely, that the Hearns lick their wounds on this, swallow their pride, suck it up, take the hit, both financial but particularly emotionally, and then just ride this big bump. It is a big bump, with the possibility that actually they may be reunited and make some money together again further down the line. That's the likeliest way this initial sort of fissure and spat plays out, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, but I would say at this moment in time they are not entertaining any wish or want or desire to get Conor Benn back, as in get him back in the team. I would say that they will be aware that they need to be careful not to shut that door in case Conor Benn comes knocking in a few fights' time. But this is going to be, as I said at the top, this is a huge statement from Zuffa, and it shows that no one is untouchable. No one is off the table in regards to who they can sign. So Matchroom, I think, now will be looking to secure the signatures of the other fighters in their stable, that if there's anybody particularly attractive that hasn't yet put pen to paper, and also looking to see how they can create the best possible events. I don't think you will see Eddie Hearn sulking about this for much longer. I think it will probably light a fire underneath him, and we'll see. But the difference is with, and this is something that Matchroom have always said, and it's why they have a really successful business. Let's not forget that they have a super successful business. They employ an awful lot of people, and they're turning over a healthy profit every single year. What Matchroom won't do, however, I don't think they're then going to throw absolutely stupid money above market value at someone to make their own statement. But what they have always done, and I think what they will continue to do, is to do business very intelligently. But I do think that Eddie Hearn will have something up his sleeve, or he will just be super determined to ensure that their shows now are as good as they possibly can be.
And of course, in the same week as the Conor Benn departure, we did get the news that DAZN are going to further support that Matchroom move, or those Matchroom moves, with a 5-year contract extension. So Eddie and Matchroom are sort of burnished with the financial muscle to go and do what it is that you're going to do. So the bitter pill has been sugar-coated a little, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it has, and that's a big deal. I mean, there was some talk not so long ago that certain promoters might move away from DAZN, but DAZN they're in a position to kind of future-proof their business by 5 years, which astonishes me that they are, and they can kind of throw around those kind of contracts. Given you look at their finances, then it's a good deal for Matchroom on the surface. It shows you, though, doesn't it? One of the faces on that marketing material 5 years with DAZN was Conor Benn. Conor Benn was almost front and centre of that announcement, even though he wasn't there. He was there kind of finalising his own deal at that point in time. Matchroom will be fine. Eddie Hearn will be fine. But I think it's a bit of a reality check for Eddie Hearn, because it's the other thing I think as well, that just is such a kind of the humiliation as well will have been with the way that Eddie Hearn has been battling with Dana White on various public platforms recently, and they've been doing the old to and from. Someone said this about you, and someone said this about you, and they're going backwards and forwards, and Eddie Hearn accusing Dana White of all sorts of things in terms of where he gets his money from and everything else. Dana White then accusing Eddie Hearn, the old accusation of just running his daddy's business for him, and the fact that just days after all this is in full flow, Conor Benn turns around and says, actually, and Conor Benn will have seen all of this developing, and he still goes over to Dana White after everything that Eddie Hearn had done for him. It still surprises me It really does. And I think the public opinion on it, I would say 80% of people were pretty sympathetic with Eddie Hearn. You get the 20% that are saying, well, promoters will always stiff fighters. The fighters can do what they like. You can understand both points of view on that. But when Eddie Hearn does come out and say, well, actually, I did take my fair share of bullets. He really did. And as someone who was trying to contact him or contact Matchroom and get conversations going, he was getting increasingly prickly during that period of time about dealing with Conor Benn issues. But I also agree that, the reason that he did stick by him is because he could see that once they'd got out of that, they'd got a really lucrative fighter on their hands. And that was proven right last year. But one suspects that the real year for liftoff for Conor Benn was 2026. And he'll be doing that with Zuffa.
Indeed, and it's further evidence that there's more than one layer to the Zuffa policy, isn't there, Matt? But there is a little bit of short-termism for sure in the interim. There's a lot of short-termism, and they're prepared to get the financial muscle and firepower out to make it happen, just to get their name out, to do some of the things they want to do. You don't necessarily imagine that Conor Benn's going to be around too long with them, because I think most of us boxing fans realise that chances are Conor Benn's going to lose sometime pretty soon. Or at least Conor Benn's going to lose as soon as he's moved up to a certain level. So I'm interested in the kind of, as ever, the bigger picture with the Zuffa policy, that sort of short-termism, what it's looking like, causing a bit of chaos, and how that knocks on and has an impact for the other promoters and for the other fighters and for the other TV execs. Because obviously you had Ryan Garcia at the weekend. He had a sort of public love. It wasn't a love-in, but at least there was at least a bit of shaking hands and maybe some mending done between Golden Boy, Oscar De La Hoya, and Ryan Garcia. Though I did note that Turki Al-Sheikh was ringside as well. And, I think Dana would love to get their hands on a Ryan Garcia, particularly with Conor Benn and Shakur and people like that in mind. So there's a few moving parts still there, but there's a real hint of short-termism about the initial Zuffa moves.
There is, and I thought that myself last week. Given the kind of shitstorm on social media, and I just thought, crikey, boxing is notorious for creating these stars and then chewing them up and spitting them out in a matter of months. All it takes is a couple of losses. Look at Tim Tszyu, for example. And you could really see something like that happening to Conor Benn if the matchmaking is all wrong for him. Is that he could suffer a defeat and then another one, and then where does he go? So yeah, I mean, I think what we're kind of living through at the moment is you do have Zuffa and you have Turki Al-Sheikh alongside them. Is that you almost sense that they could really do whatever they want. I think we had this conversation maybe 3-4 weeks ago where you were saying, would someone like a Joshua go to Zuffa? And I think Joshua would be the one where he'd say, no, I won't. But you look around at everyone else, and no one's off the table for them. And in the short term, and this has been the case with Turki Al-Sheikh since he's came along like a whirlwind into the boxing industry. And this is the thing that must concern every single established promoter more than anything else, not losing their star prize to Zuffa or losing their star prize to Turki Al-Sheikh. It's the fact that at the moment, these people seem to be operating without any concern about their end-of-year accounts. And when someone can just throw that amount of money around without worrying about any returns, then it puts extreme pressure on those that do and have to survive. So yeah, we'll wait and see. But you can imagine it. You can imagine it in 12 months' time. Conor Benn, say for argument's sake, Conor Benn's lost 2 fights. They'll be like, oh, well, that doesn't matter. Right, off you go, Conor. We'll get on the next one. And then we'll get on the next one.
Our understanding is that there isn't going to be a big event in Saudi until September in terms of the boxing. But, of course, September is when we're going to see Pacquiao Mayweather 2. Mayweather, who turns 49 this week. And I suppose if people are critical of Conor Benn, I think fewer people will be critical of Conor Benn for making a financial move in the way that he has. In the same way that you don't think Joshua would ever leave Matchroom because of what they've done for each other and the relationships they've built. That's in the same way that people wouldn't expect Joshua to do that for all of those reasons, the reasons that they can criticize Conor Benn for leaving. So it is a dual approach, I think, with that discussion. But of course, there will be people who now think about the money, the Mayweather story, the lawsuit against Showtime, etc., the $300+ million that has gone missing or has been squandered, depending on your point of view, depending on what the truth will out. But Mayweather returning in September, turning 49 this week, and Pacquiao Mayweather 2 in the works for September the 19th on Netflix. I had zero interest in the first fight, Matt, so you know how low down in my priority list this is. I wasn't even bothered to watch the first fight initially. I was not bothered at all. So you can get a sense of how I feel several years removed. But there will be people, Matt, just looking at the Mayweather situation, you know, if he's gone skint for whatever reason, the guy he used to troll us with the front cover of Forbes and the houses and the jets and the speedboats and the money being thrown away. If Mayweather is having to come back for the money, I mean, that is a wake-up call for everyone in the fight business and every fighter who ever laces up a pair of gloves.
I don't know for certain. I haven't seen his accounts, but one would think that surely this is only for the money. He was so protective of that 50-0 that he managed to get to. 50-0, and I'm not risking it. I'm not coming back. My legacy is too important. And of course, your legacy will be exceptionally important when you've got million upon million upon million of pounds in the bank. But when that money starts to whittle away, and there might be a little bit of pressure to pay this bill and pay that bill, certain things become less important, and then you just want the relief of being back on financial stable ground. And if I had to have a guess, I'd say that is the case here. He's agreed to have the fight with Manny Pacquiao. He knows how much money he can earn from having a fight with Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao proved himself to an extent last year when he came back. So that will heighten interest to a degree. I do think it'll be massive. I still think that an awful lot of people will watch this. If they get the right marketing campaign behind it, an awful lot of people will watch it. Maybe not the likes of you, but there will be people that will remember it from 10 or 11 years ago. And has there been a bigger name in boxing since Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao since they walked away? No, there hasn't. And I think there's several factors at play there. And I don't necessarily think it's because we haven't had the talent. I think it's, again, just the evolving effect of the fractured landscape, the difficulty that the public at large have in following the sport, and the fact that pretty much the majority of boxing now is so difficult to watch for the majority of people that people are just not aware. And I know it sounds silly, but like the things that we see in newspapers, the things that we see on television, the things that we see on social media, not boxing social media, but social media, as in big sporting events, very rare that boxing even gets a mention in that. You will have like Fury Usyk will get a mention, but there won't really be a song and dance about it. And you look back and you think, well, it was when Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather, there was the last time that we had this. There's a reason why the people at Netflix are not stupid. They won't really be caring about the state of boxing. They will look at the most recognizable people out there to create the biggest event that will draw the most eyes. And they will still recognise that both Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather are huge names. And you throw them together with the whole rematch story, and you will get a lot of people watching it. Am I interested in it? I'm more interested in it than you are. Just because I was the first one will always have a place in my heart. Because I was out there. I was literally days into being the editor of Boxing News. I think my first official day of being the editor of Boxing News was either the day of the weigh-in or the day of the fight. So for me personally, yeah, I can imagine I'll get sucked into it. But I'm not going to be getting up in the middle of the night to watch it. I doubt I'll attend. But I'll have some interest in it purely for nostalgic reasons. But I think age 49 and 46 or whatever they'll be when they fight, and it's going to be one of the biggest fights of the year, I think is insane. And I think everybody in boxing needs to take a look at themselves and ask themselves why that is the situation in 2026. Because it will be. It will be one of the biggest fights, if not the biggest fight of the year, in terms of eyes on it. And seriously, ask yourself why. Ask yourself why this has been allowed to happen and why this is the case. Is there any other sport? Is there any other sport where they'd have to be hauling people back out, hauling people out of retirement at least 10 years past their best, probably 15 years more realistically, 15 years past their best to create some kind of showpiece to draw in a massive audience? There isn't another sport like it that would do that. Or would have to.
I think boxing should be the one sport where aging veterans and fans' appreciation of them should wane more noticeably than any other sport. Boxing should be the sport where fans actually don't dig into the nostalgia and don't dig in to the idea that there might be one last hurrah. The boxing should be the very, very sport where that doesn't happen, because it's the one sport where the danger is more imminent, where the signs are more obvious that you can't do what you used to be able to do. Boxing should be the one sport where there's no place for nostalgia, no place. And there should be no room for fandom for this type of event. It might sound like I feel strongly about it. I'm an outlier. I get it. I'm an outlier in this discussion. But I just about understand Mick Jagger creaking around on stage at the age of 60, still remembering the words, and people in the audience who were there first time around still enjoying it. Ronnie Wood can still just about carry the tune. I get it. I get that just. But a Mike Tyson, in his late 50s, 60, coming back to the ring when he was shot back in the 1990s, and Mayweather just about to turn 50, he probably can still do it to an extent. Pacquiao's not been the tour de force for a decade or more. When they fought last time, it was a pretty horrible fight, and they were in their 30s. What are you expecting? I'm talking to fans now. What are you expecting? What are you buying into? I don't get it. I don't get it. I've no desire to watch it. And I've always felt that way, and I always feel that way. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And I just don't think there should be a place for it in boxing. I don't think there should be a place for it in boxing fandom either. And I just think people who do buy into this, for whatever reason, I just don't understand it. Don't understand it.
Yeah, but you kind of say fans there, and I think the vast majority of kind of hardcore boxing fans, like the likes of you and I, they probably can take it or leave it. Dare say they'll watch when it comes to it. They're not now going to be circling September the 19th on their calendar and making sure that nothing interferes with that between now and then. They won't. And I think you kind of largely the opening bell audience is the wrong audience to kind of make that speech to. I think they're well aware of the shortcomings of this, but unfortunately there's an awful lot of people out there, and this is kind of who Netflix are aiming at. It's the other people who've got a vague interest in the sport. They'll know the names Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, and they'll be interested in it. And this is the thing, isn't it? And I think that many people involved in boxing have long overestimated the size of that hardcore fan pool, which is decreasing with each passing year, to my mind. for a lot of the reasons that we've spoke about. Is that boxing is not nearly as accessible or easy to understand as it used to be. But you throw these two together, and you know, people felt the same about Jake Paul, Anthony Joshua. People felt the same about Jake Paul, Mike Tyson. And this is what I said to somebody last week. So the thing is, with all of these nonsense fights, has any of them actually been any good? Yet they keep churning them out. They haven't. They've all been terrible, really, by and large.
I've got an idea for you. How about in 2035 or 2040, we do Wood Warrington 3? Up for that?
Well, no, but that's you see, you it's a different. I think you'd have to say maybe in 2035 or 2040 we do Canelo Crawford 2. That's more that would be in a similar ballpark. This is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about here. Something along those lines. Which is you say that now, you'd be like, no.
Yeah. Exactly. I'm being facetious by means of a link into Wood Warrington because
I knew what you were
actually,
doing, and I'm sorry to kibosh it.
Yeah, we did. We excuse me. We did actually get. We did get an element of Leigh Wood turning back time, a small slice of him turning back time to an extent. He was aided and abetted by Josh Warrington just not being able to do what he once was able to do. And last week I asked you, which would be, what deteriorates more? What is it that cause and effect? 37 versus 35, the careers that they've had, the fights they've been in. What is it that tells here? What is it that tells? And we weren't quite sure, to be honest, weren't we? We couldn't really answer the question. But actually, in the end, the Warrington engine, the Warrington energy, the Warrington high guard press and aggression, that was the thing that told, wasn't it? That was the thing that frayed and creaked and just wasn't there anymore. But Leigh Wood was good and showed that actually maybe had he boxed slightly differently at times in his career, he may have excelled even more, because that version, that style of Leigh Wood was absolutely all wrong for Josh Warrington on the night. But Wood, aided and abetted by Warrington, as good as he was.
He was. I mean, Leigh Wood was able to slow it down. He was able to go at his own pace. He was able to pick his spots. He was able to conserve his energy, I thought. And I thought he boxed really well. I've got to be honest. I mean, I wasn't massively excited about this, largely for some of the reasons that we've already described about Mayweather Pacquiao. I know it's different, that this was only a few years ago, but I just felt that neither of them were the fighter that they were, and this didn't carry anything like the significance of the first fight. But I thought Wood was good. If he was going to fight again, I'd have no issue with that. I thought he showed kind of I thought the maturity helped him, and I thought that if it was going to be someone winning on the cards after 12 rounds, it would have been Warrington. But Wood, for me, controlled the vast majority of the contest. And I think one of the most revealing things in terms of Josh Warrington is what he said afterwards, because he hasn't been committal on retirement, although that is the most common question he's fielding at the moment is that the end for you, Josh? Because it's been a terrific career. Is this the end? And he said something along the lines of, I felt brilliant in sparring. I felt brilliant doing all of my training. I was in the best shape I could possibly be in. But something just wasn't right on the night. Unfortunately, what isn't right on the night is that he's too old. That's it. And it will never be right on the night at a certain level. From here on in, as brutal as that sounds, he has reached that point in his career. He's a naturally super fit individual who'll always be able to get himself in shape. But ultimately, it's those moments in the fight where you can't do what you want to do, and that is all the writing on the wall that you need to take notice of, to read, to digest and act on it. And that's what I hope that he does. ultimately it has to be his decision, because he clearly loves the sport. He adores the sport. He announced his retirement in 2024, I think, and then went away, spent some time in the gym, realised that essentially this is all he wants to do, and he's come back. I think deep down he will know full well that there is no turning back the clock. It's such a cruel realisation, I would imagine, when you're in that ring and you just can't do, you know what you want to do, but you can't do it. You know exactly what you want to do and you can't do it. And if you look at his performance on Saturday night and then go back and watch him against Colframpton or something or other along those lines, you will see that's it now, I think, for Josh Warrington. I'm sure there'll be opportunities should he want them against an up-and-comer or something like that. But is that the way you want to go? Do you want to take more punches? I'm sure he's financially secure. But it is such a difficult moment for these boxers that if he's not ready to retire yet, you don't judge them. I used to, but you don't judge them. Because you've put your whole life into this trade and now you've got no choice, while still contextually a young man. And I suspect he's going to do a bit of soul searching and he will hope beyond hope that he can find some kind of answer or justification to carry on. But I suspect when all the dust is settled, he'll realise that this is the end.
It looks so glaring, doesn't it? And listen, if I find that as a fan and as a human being, as a man, if I find that one of the toughest things to see, I find it so poignant, to be honest. Watching Warrington at the weekend, I mentioned it a few months ago, didn't I, about it being one of the most difficult things for me to watch as a fan, is to see someone at the end of their career, and knowing how I feel about it, the empathy, the understanding and sympathy I have for them as an athlete. Well, what's it like for them? Do you know, what are they going through? It must be even more painful, even more difficult. So I have real empathy for him, but it's glaring. It really is glaring, and it's striking and stark visually. So if we see it, he must see it because he felt it. As for Leigh Wood, he sparkled, didn't he? Distance control, those feints, the changing angles up and down, just constant control, wasn't there? Distance was excellent, footwork was excellent, always controlling from the centre of the ring, those stabbing shots to the body, southpaw all the way through, the right hook worked for him. He pretty much controlled and did as he liked. It was masterful in many ways, in truth, from Leigh Wood. And he might well suddenly be told that he's better than ever before. Maybe. But
he might, but there was also suggestion from him that he's considering retirement. He said, if that's my last fight, then what a performance to go out on. Because fights like this can tell us a few fibs in certain regards, and in different ways. And that, yes, Leigh Wood did look better than he'd looked for quite a while. But was that because Josh Warrington was so bad? And the moment that Leigh Wood goes in and fights someone who's 29 years old, and he's on the way up, that Leigh Wood will look exactly what he looked like the last time he fought someone who was on the way up or at a certain level. So, we wait and see with Leigh Wood.
Yeah. And I tell you, actually, despite Leigh Wood winning, I tell you, the biggest winner of that weekend is Kakachi, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who's beaten them both and looked pretty good doing so as well. He's got Jazza Dickens coming up. So, yeah, Kakachi was the big winner, although Bilal Fawaz probably feels like it, in truth, having become a British and Commonwealth champion at the age of 37. Big night for the 37-year-olds, wasn't it, in Wood and Fawaz. And amazing how that one turned around, Matt, because it looked like Ishmael Davis was just going to do his thing and control that. They were tight rounds, in truth. No, he wasn't running away with it, but it did look like it was sort of one-way traffic on the cards early doors. But he got sort of very tired, didn't he, in the second half of the fight, Ishmael Davis. And Fawaz, he's just a nuisance and strong. His mindset is fantastic. He's got a kind of quirky confidence. And it all just kept bubbling away and simmering away, and he kept pecking away. And before you know it, he was winning, and he won.
he's got such an extraordinary story, Fawaz, that makes him exceptionally easy to root for. So when he did start to mount that comeback, then you kind of think, well, fair play to you. What he's been through in his life, and when you kind of hear what he's been through in his life, and then you see him winning a fight like that, which, in the grand scheme of things, that wouldn't have registered to anybody outside of Great Britain, really. But you think, he deserves something now. Let's try and orchestrate some kind of title shot for Fawaz, because he deserves to be financially secure. He deserves everything, really, given all that he's been through, and that level of determination that he has psychologically is obviously, it's unteachable. One suspects, though, if he does get up to the next level, then it's just going to be a step too far for him. But at the moment, another heartwarming, terrific win and a great story at the weekend.
Yeah, he could be the sort of 2026 Nathan Heaney, couldn't he, in a way, without necessarily the fan base to go with it. But yeah, feel-good story. Clarissa Shields was successful at the weekend in a good fight against their old rival, Cruz Dezern. Sweeping the boards on that one, remains unbeaten. It looks like Michaela Mayer, who was on comms for that fight, looks like they're going to try and navigate some kind of catch-weight fight between... squeeze them together. Yeah, I think so. Almost certainly. Don't know what that would look like. It'd probably be super middle, would it? I guess. And Mayer would have to go up from welterweight. So yeah, I'm guessing that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, and I think that we've spoke about women's boxing many times, not so much recently because I don't think it's been as prominent in the last couple of years. Various reasons for that, but I think that given there's probably 6, 7 like really big names in women's boxing. Consequently, you do have a point where you kind of have to force them together and create catch weights, and someone's got to lose weight, someone's got to put on weight, just to make a marketable event.
Indeed. Well, it's easy to root for Bilal Fawaz, as Matt was saying. Maybe less so Ryan Garcia, in truth, because of what's happened over the last couple of years, and maybe because of his personality not lending itself to it either. But either way, Garcia has millions and millions of social media followers. He is a catch for both promoters and for the TV execs. And he was simply too quick, too good for Barrios, who in truth has just been there to get beat for so long now, Barrios, and finally it kind of caught up with him, doesn't it? I'm sorry to say, Mario, sorry, but it is the truth, unfortunately, isn't it? And finally it did catch up with Barrios, and it caught up with him pretty fast, painfully and early, because Ryan Garcia, so fated for his left hook and his fast hands, could not miss him with a right hand, Matt, which put him down in the first 30 seconds and troubled him again through rounds 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, I mean, I actually picked Barrios to win this fight when I did the boxing scene preview. I just watched a video of Barrios from a few weeks ago in training camp and some of the stuff he was saying, and the amount of times in the recent past where Garcia has just been erratic, unpredictable. Even when he beat Devin Haney, it was largely because of the knockdowns he scored, but there were other points in that fight where he was flat, he was disinterested, and it was a last-minute change of mind for me. I was previously just going to go with Garcia to win on points, and then I just thought, well, I'm still yet to be convinced by Ryan Garcia for numerous reasons, but yeah, he won pretty much every round. He was out of the blocks very quickly. The right, as you say, people are used to his left hook, but the right hand he couldn't miss with. Quite a heavy fall from Barrios in the first round, and one wonders, what impact that had on his approach for the rest of the fight. But then the one thing that I was struggling to justify while writing that particular preview was Barrios' performance against Manny Pacquiao. And I think if you look at that performance against someone of Pacquiao's age, then Garcia probably only would have needed to be about 80% to win the fight anyway. But But yeah, I've seen different reports now with Ryan Garcia. This is what the sport needs, is that we need these big stars like Ryan Garcia. Truth of the matter is that he was handed a ban after failing tests, was gifted a title shot in his first fight back, and then lost that, and then was gifted another in his second fight back. So the messaging for people that would like to do the right thing or see the right thing be carried out is not great. But then you remind yourself that this is boxing. And infamy sells, which is very much the case with Ryan Garcia. When he's right, and when he looks, when you see him in full flow, like we did on Saturday, he does look really impressive. I think he'd beat Conor Benn all day long if that was made at welterweight, if Ryan Garcia is focused. And for the time being, he seems to be. But some of the things he's done and said, again, not really my cup of tea. But when you're just watching what he can do in the ring, you kind of feel like there is still untapped potential there with Ryan Garcia.
And he did belatedly come back into the VADA testing fold, didn't he, Matt? He was tested for the Barrios fight. He returned to VADA testing in mid-December, I believe, but he took himself out of VADA throughout last year. So last summer, June to December, he wasn't in the testing fold, but he did re-enter himself in mid-December, I believe. How do you read all of that?
I think you could probably guess how I'll read it, to be honest. I don't know why you'd take yourself away from that if you're trying to prove that you're completely clean. I'm sure he is clean, old Ryan. Sure, he's clean as a whistle.
Little sniffy, though, isn't it? Little sniffy. Little bit stinky. But those are the facts, folks. And we only deal in facts and some opinion on the opening bell podcast. And we are grateful to NAS Medical Limited and the team who specialise in complete medical coverage for boxing events. They power and sponsor the pod. Their coverage includes Fight Night, Ringside Medical Care, Ringside Medicine training courses, and also expert second opinions on all aspects of boxing-related medical matters. You can find them on Instagram at NAS Medical Limited or online, the old route, nasmedical.co.uk. Boxer safety is their priority, so thanks to them for powering the pod. And this weekend in Derby, DAZN, Owen Cooper against Konstantin Ursu for the British and Commonwealth titles. I've seen a lot of Ursu, talented, unbeaten in 14, very, very good. Marley Dan and the team down in Plymouth have done great stuff with him, so he's a real success story. Ursu, a favourite to win that one. And Navarrete against Nunes. Matt, coming up as well in Arizona on DAZN. Navarrete 7-4. Nunes, who was the kind of puncher until he moved up in class. He's beaten a few sort of lesser international fighters recently, and he's gone the distance in both of those. And we know Navarrete's sort of beaten the likes of Valdez. He had a good fight with Conceição, doesn't he? Navarrete's fought at a much, much higher level. He's got speedy hands, Nunes. He's the 2-1 on favourite. I mean, I've backed against Navarrete so many times and got it wrong almost always that I'm always loath to count Navarrete out. And I do think the bookies might have made a slight mistake with this one, having Navarrete nearly 2-1 against.
Yeah, I was surprised actually. Then when you said the odds, I would have thought that Navarrete might start as favourite. I feel like I don't want to predict another fight at the moment.
Yeah, I know how you feel. I know how you feel. I think we were leaning towards Warrington last week, and yeah, we just didn't know about Garcia. I mean, that Rolly Romero defeat for Ryan Garcia just plays on your brain, and you think, oh, if he can lose to Rolly Romero, he can lose to anyone, that guy, really. Yeah. But at his best, he really should have been winning at the weekend, and he did, particularly given Barrios is so beatable. So, yeah, it's one of those.
It is, and I went through a little purple patch with my predictions, and now I'm back to, feeling like I don't know what I'm talking about. But I must admit, when this was first kind of announced and everything else, I was kind of leaning towards Nunes, but I didn't think he'd be the favourite, so I'll stick with that. I haven't done any deep analysis on it yet, so I'll stick with Nunes to get a decision after 12 rounds.
Well, as often we'll say, pick this, but actually, if I was having a bet, I'd back Navarrete. I think he's the wrong price at 7-4. I think they should be much, much closer together. I'm not all that convinced that I have Nunes is outright favourite, to be honest with you. So Navarrete, I think the bet is 7-4. That's coming up, and it's on DAZN this weekend. Coming up next is This Week. And this week, we take you back to the 24th of February, 1996, at Richmond, Virginia. Terrible Terry Norris was in action on this card, defending his 154-pound world titles, and he would stop Vince Petway, former titleist himself, in 8 rounds. He just kind of dominated from start to finish on the undercard. But we're going to talk about Oliver McCall coming back, first fight back from defeat to Bruno, where he kind of sleptwalked through the early rounds, Matt, didn't he? Or maybe slightly fearful of Bruno's big right hand, the strong jab, and he let the fight get away from him. And it was only belatedly that he was stirred into action, Oliver McCall. But he was up against a prospect, former amateur, in Oleg Maskaev. 6-0, Oleg Maskaev, going in against a guy who'd only just lost the heavyweight world title, Matt. You're thinking, what were they thinking?
What were they thinking? And so it transpired. I think the most interesting thing about this is the post-fight interviews, to be honest. So I think you can catch the whole thing. It's about 15 minutes long. So you get the whole fight, you get a tiny bit of the build-up. You get the fight, which doesn't last very long, and then you get the post-fight interviews. And they essentially admit, don't they, Team Maskaev, that they rolled the dice here. He was well regarded at the time. Interesting, too, that, as you say, what was he, 5-0, 6-0? Yeah, he's announced in the ring as being 15-0 with 12 knockouts. And the commentary team are like, I don't know where they got that from. I think they've included some amateur fights because I think he's 6-0 with two knockouts at the moment. But Maskaev, probably thought that given all of what was being said about Oliver McCall at the time, already the out-of-the-ring problems with various things that Oliver McCall was suffering from that had appeared to get worse when he rose in prominence, when he upset Lennox Lewis, beat Larry Holmes in the defence and then struggled against Frank Bruno. There was already a lot of whispers behind the scenes about Oliver McCall. So you could see why Maskaev, given how well educated and schooled that he was at amateur level, that they would think maybe it's worth taking a bit of a punt on this if Oliver McCall is damaged goods, if he's not looking after himself. But what did it last? About a minute and a half? Big body shot from Oliver McCall. Maskaev kind of trying to get out of the way, but he traps himself on the ropes, almost leaves himself wide open for a short chopping Oliver McCall right hand. And Oliver McCall could really hit, which is why a lot of people thought that he would catch up with Frank Bruno eventually in that fight. McCall showed himself to be a force again in the heavyweight division with his victory.
He did. He's a well-delivered punches, actually. Matt said he traps Maskaev on the ropes and he throws a sort of left hook come uppercut into the body. It's a body shot, isn't it? It's a left hook come uppercut. You call it a left hook, really, into the body. And then he just slides across to his right. He comes back with a really short right hand stroke right hook. And he's just wide open for it. Maskaev goes down. He gets up around 9, doesn't he? But the referee's sort of continuing the count. And that is that. Referee Joseph Cooper, who at the start, Matt, do you see what he says at the start to the fighters? Let's throw some thunder, he says to them as they're touching gloves at the very start. I'm an absolute madman. But I suppose everyone wants their Michael Buffer catch line, don't they? Everyone wants their moment. I suppose we had let's get it on, didn't we? And we had Joe Cortez's I'm fair but I'm firm, getting it the wrong way round. Yeah, so I suppose the Americans like their catch lines, don't they?
Oh, they do. They do. But you know, with McCall, you look back on his career. It's such a long career. I mean, he's still going until last year. I think he's still got designs on somehow snare in some kind of money fight when he's in his mid-50s still. But if you do look at his career, and then you're to compile a list of, say, the best heavyweights of the last 30 years, McCall's got to be somewhere amongst it. When he was on, he was really difficult to beat. I think we obviously saw it against Lennox Lewis. But it did seem for a while that McCall was the kind of fighter that just wasn't quite going to get over the line. I remember seeing him in a weird American magazine, which was a heavyweight special. It might be called Boxing Insider. And there was talking about Oliver McCall, and this is the guy that could stand up to Mike Tyson in sparring. You just wait till he gets some kind of backing behind him and everything else. But he would lose to the likes of Orlin Norris, Tony Tucker, Buster Douglas on 10-round fights. But then he in a minor upset, beat Francesco Damiani. Then he got the shot at Lennox Lewis. And for a time, I mean, there was a lot of talk about Tyson versus McCall, which I think would have been a better fight than Tyson Bruno 2, in all honesty. Tyson McCall, the talk about their history in sparring. And if McCall had have been free of any demons going into a fight in the mid-90s with Mike Tyson, I think he could have given Tyson an argument around that time.
Yeah, very much so. I must admit, there was that sort of moody look afterwards, wasn't there? It didn't last too long. It lasted for about sort of 30, 40 seconds, where after the knockout, you saw that moody look where you don't know whether he's going to cry or he's just going to erupt, Oliver McCall. And he's just strutting round the ring after a knockout, isn't he, with that moody look in his face. And then you wind forward to a couple of fights to 1997 and the Lennox Lewis rematch in Vegas, and that look again. I mean, it doesn't last that long, Matt. And then his kids come into the ring, and suddenly you see the smile, and he sort of breaks it. And I think there's an element, they talk about it in commentary, don't they, of McCall, the nice guy, having to almost build himself up into McCall, the heavyweight, the fighter, the fearsome athlete. So maybe there was a bit of that at play, but it does make you wind on to 97 and what happens in the rematch with Lennox.
Yeah, one of the most infamous fights, isn't it? Given that McCall appeared to be suffering from a breakdown whilst he was in the midst of a boxing match, and in the end it just had to be stopped because he was tearful, he was angry, and clearly not in a good place to be thrown in with Lennox Lewis at that point. But you would see it with Oliver McCall, where he would, on his good nights, where on his ring walk, he's getting himself into a frenzy almost, so that he's emotional. And I think in this case, the fact that the fight only lasted 90 seconds, and I've spoken to boxers before in that they say that they do have to get themselves into warrior mode. And the difficulty for some of them is that when the fight's over, you can't then just click out of it. It's when often some boxers will give regrettable post-fight interviews or something of that nature, is that they are still very much in the dark part of their brain that they have to get into to be fighters. And I think that's what we saw with Oliver McCall here. But he was saying in his post-fight interview about those, he's saying that, he thanked a police force, didn't he, for putting him back on the straight and narrow. And of course, he thanked God, saying that is the only person that can keep me on the straight and narrow is God or Jesus. I forget exactly who he thanked, but it shows you, because he couldn't stay on the straight and narrow, and he wasn't on the straight and narrow. And he hadn't been on the straight and narrow in the build-up to the Lennox Lewis rematch. And for many years, up until the fairly recent past, the straight and narrow was somewhere that Oliver McCall, of all people, really struggled to walk along exclusively. But there's a bit of the kind of Burt Cooper fascination that I have with Smoking Burt that I've also got for Oliver McCall. I think it's not a book that would sell particularly well, unfortunately. But I think you sit down with Oliver McCall and you get him to tell you the warts and all of his life, of his career, and what was going on outside the ropes. You got a heck of a story on your hands.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The years of the locusts all over again. I fancy where he'd have a few stories to tell about Don King, I think, as well, who, of course, was as part of his team on this very night. I've been depressed, he said afterwards in that post-fight interview of his time subsequent to the Bruno defeat. And he would lose to Lennox in that infamous fight 11 months later in 1997. He'd have long stretches out the ring, wouldn't he? 4.5 years out of the ring, 2014 onwards, 5.5 years out of the ring, 2019 onwards, punctuated comebacks. And as Matt said, even up until June of last year, he was still fighting, winning 2 of his last 3 fights. That's at the age of 59/60 years old, Oliver McCall. Would you believe it? As regards Maskaev, Matt, his corner said, I guess we made the wrong decision taking the fight then, obviously. Tommy Gallagher in his corner. They dealt with those post-fight interviews pretty well, I think, as well as they could do. Because what are they going to say to some of those questions? But fair play to Maskaev, because he would rebound a couple of times, wouldn't he? He'd go on a run after this, then he'd lose to Tua. He'd go on another run, beat Rachman. He'd lose to a couple, including Corey Sanders. Then he'd go on that amazing sort of latter run at the turn of the millennium, which would lead him all the way to beating Rachman again and winning the WBC title in sort of 2006 or thereabouts. So defeats would come Maskaev's way again, Matt, but he would recover and he'd get there.
He was, yeah, and I think it was so he lost to McCall, and then it wasn't that. He went on a bit of a run, lost to David Tua, but it was during that David Tua defeat where I think we saw that there was ability there, and I think we are also operating in, with respect to anybody that was around then, when you put it alongside some of the other eras in heavyweight history, around the point where Maskaev is winning a title and essentially is just in and around the number 1, number 2 spot in the WBC rankings. It seemed like for years and years and years, it was a fairly weak era. But full credit to Maskaev, that's not his fault. He did what he had to do. And after a loss, kind of high profile on a donking undercard to Oliver McCall in the first round, to then brush himself down and go, it doesn't matter. Off we go again. Fight David Tua, lose that after 11 rounds. One of the judges had him ahead, I think, in that particular fight at the point of the stoppage. To then prove himself to be one of the best in the world in his era is a huge achievement. But I don't think you don't often see Oleg Maskaev being bandied about in the fantasy heavyweight fights, do you? Oh, Yusuf Maskaev. Oh, yeah, how would that one finish?
No. I think we might have done one of the Rachman fights with Maskaev. I think we might have talked about it collaterally. Yeah.
One of them was chaotic. I think one of them.
Yeah.
Was it Maskaev where Hasim Rachman ended up with a TV monitor in his?
Yeah, out the ring.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we've done that on This Week in History. I'm pretty sure we have. So go back and watch that then. That is Oliver McCall against Maskaev from 96. And while you do, check out the Patreon. For less than $5 a month, you can support the pod. We do appreciate all the lovely patrons for doing that. They really do help us produce the pod each and every week and continue to fight the fight for you. Tell your friends, tune in, support us on the socials as well. And we will speak to you again next week. Bye for now. Take care.